After Paul's wife passed away, he bought her dream hotel. But when he moved in, a woman murdered a child in the hotel. Similarly, Harry, like Paul, bought his wife's dream hotel and wanted to make a big name for it. One day, a killer murdered a child in Harry's hotel. After that, his hotel's reputation was ruined. The scene flashes back to the past. It takes us to the time when Harry was about to buy the motel. That day, both Harry and his wife were filled with joy, as running the motel and building a reputation had always been Harry's dream. Sadly, that dream never became a reality. The day Officer Kim went to Harry's house, she found Lee dead. Lee had committed suicide. Before taking her own life, she left a note explaining that she couldn't bear the memories of the young girls Carl, the killer, had murdered. The nightmares of those girls haunted her daily, and she could no longer live with that torment. This led her to take her own life. With Lee gone, Harry sank even deeper into loneliness. His motel had already been closed, and now, with the grief of Lee's death, he was completely shattered. After speaking with Kim, Harry visits Carl in prison. He confronts him, asking, "What did I ever do to you? Why did you ruin my life?" But Carl shows no remorse, replying, "You were the one who invited me to the motel that day, so this is all your fault." After the encounter, Harry leaves and tries to give Kim some money as a token of thanks. Kim refuses multiple times, but Harry forces the money into her hand, thanks her, and walks away. Before leaving, Harry tells Kim, "Don't ever become a frog in your life, because people only throw stones at it and leave." And the frog is left wondering, why me? What did I do wrong? Does the person throwing stones have no one else in the world to aim at? With that, Harry departs. The story then jumps back to the present. Paul, worried about his daughter, goes to the lab to check on her. Relieved to see Iris safe, he chats with her briefly, and then heads to the hospital to visit Paxton. Before he leaves, Iris gives him a gift for Paxton. As Paul prepares to leave, he notices Susie standing in the distance. Nervous, Paul starts following her, but as he chases after her, he stumbles and falls, losing sight of Susie. Iris, unaware of Paul's turmoil, is left puzzled by his strange behavior. The story shifts again to the past. After meeting Harry, Kim goes to speak with her senior officer. She hands him the money Harry gave her and explains the situation. Her senior, who knows Kim well, reminds her of her strengths. Kim is not driven by a desire to help people, but by her passion for catching criminals. In the department, she's like a hunter. Once she has her sights set on a criminal, it's nearly impossible for them to escape. Back in the present, Paul visits Paxton at the hospital. Paxton's leg has been put in a cast, and the two sit down for a drink and chat. Paul had intended to tell Paxton everything about Susie, but before he can reveal the truth, he spots Susie's shadow in the distance. Fearful, Paul decides not to tell Paxton the full story. Instead, he only mentions that the girl who stayed at his rental last year, Susie, left something important behind, and he's been trying to return it to her. As Paul reflects on the situation, he realizes that Susie never used her real name when she booked the rental. It was under her son's name. It was only after she left that he found Iris's picture among her belongings. With everything starting to make sense, Paul heads home. Later, when Susie is outside, Paul tries to secretly access her laptop, but it's password protected. He takes the laptop to a shop where the technician tells him that breaking the password would erase all the data. Frustrated and confused, Paul returns home, unsure of how to deal with the constant trouble Susie is causing him. Susie's behavior is unpredictable and unsettling. No one could guess what she was thinking or what her next move might be. One day, Susie visits a laundromat in Paul's neighborhood. She asks the owner to take photos of the shop, saying she wants to use the same colors in a painting. Her actions are strange, but murder was something far beyond ordinary. Susie knew Paul had taken her laptop, yet she didn't try to stop him. When Paul returns, Susie calmly asks for her laptop back, telling him, "If there's something you want to know, just ask me." Paul remains silent. That evening, he has dinner with Susie, using the opportunity to ask her the questions that have been tormenting him. But Susie, always one step ahead, manages to turn the tables on him. She tells Paul, "When I stayed here with my son last year, you only had one piece of evidence, some footage. If you go to the police, you'll be in trouble too. You've hidden that evidence for a year, and even tried to erase it to help me." After hearing Susie's words, Paul immediately stands up and storms out. Part of him starts to believe she might be right, but Paul isn't naive. Unbeknownst to Susie, he had secretly recorded their entire conversation. The next morning, Paul takes the recording and heads straight for the police station. However, when Susie wakes up, she spots an empty recorder box in Paul's room, the one he purchased the previous day. Realizing he recorded their conversation, Susie quickly jumps into her car and speeds toward the police station. Meanwhile, Paul arrives at the station, but before he can exit his car, Susie crashes into him. The impact is severe, and blood gushes from Paul's head as he starts to lose consciousness. This is where the fourth episode ends. We see Officer Kim cleaning her house while listening to the news. A report flashes about a young man around 20 to 22 years old in Seoul who has recently committed suicide. Before his death, he posted that he had been writing the autobiography of the serial killer, Carl. Despite suspicions, the police found no solid evidence linking his death to Carl, and a petition to investigate the boy's death as murder was dismissed. As she listens to the broadcast, Kim, ever the detective, begins to harbor her own suspicions. The story then flashes back to the past, where a reporter approaches Officer Kim, asking her about the infamous water tank case she had solved. Although Kim typically dislikes discussing her cases, she begrudgingly shares some details when the reporter persists. Back in the present, Paul is rushed to the hospital, severely injured from the crash. While Paul is being treated, Susie sneaks into his car and steals his bag, which contains the recorder. When Paul returns home, he doesn't confront Susie about the accident. Instead, he simply says, "I have no evidence left. Just leave this house." But Susie coldly responds, "I'm not going anywhere. In fact, you're going to have to sell this house." It becomes clear that Susie's true goal is to take over Paul's rental property, and that's why she came back in the first place. However, Paul refuses to sell, as the house holds too many memories of his late wife. This sparks a heated argument. Nat and Paul storms out of the house. For Paul, this is now a battle he is determined to win at any cost. Paul devises a plan to get rid of Susie. He begins bringing in tenants to stay at the rental house, knowing it will disrupt her. When the tenants move in, Susie tries calling Paul, but he ignores her. Frustrated, the tenants call the police, and Officer Kim arrives with her colleague, Officer Brock, to assist them. The tenants explain that Paul, the house owner, didn't mention Susie when they booked the rental. Upon investigating, Brock finds that Susie doesn't have any legal booking documents, so she is forced to vacate the house. Enraged, Susie packs her things and moves into the storage room, boiling with anger at Paul, but unable to do anything until she can reach him. Paul continues to send more tenants to the house, confident that Susie will eventually give up and leave due to the chaos. However, Susie is not one to back down easily. She finds an unexpected ally in Officer Brock. From the moment Brock laid eyes on Susie, he was infatuated, and Susie is quick to exploit this. Brock even takes 2 days off from the station to assist her. Using his connections, Brock brings some of his friends to Paul's rental house to stay as tenants. With these new tenants in place, Paul is forced to return to the rental house. He quickly realizes that Brock is helping Susie, but he only smirks to himself. Brock has no idea what kind of dangerous woman Susie truly is. Eventually, Brock's friends leave, but Brock himself stays behind with Susie. One night, Paul, Susie, and Brock have dinner together. During the meal, Brock sides with Susie and makes harsh comments toward Paul. However, Paul calmly replies, "You may be a police officer, but you don't know how to judge people. You can't tell the difference between the good and the bad." Angered by Paul's words, Brock is about to lash out, but Susie stops him from escalating the situation. After dinner, Susie confronts Paul privately once again. She demands that he sell the house and even threatens him, saying, "I'll kill you, just like I killed that little boy." Enraged, Paul grabs Susie by the throat and throws her onto the bed. When Brock finds out what happened, he rushes to Paul and tries to fight him. But Susie steps in and stops the altercation before it spirals out of control. After this, Paul drives away, and taking advantage of the moment, Brock and Susie start getting romantic. While driving, Paul notices a wild boar crossing the road, but he's so fed up with Susie's behavior that he pays no attention to it. Unsure about what to do with Susie, a new idea suddenly comes to him. Paul grabs a stick and returns home, where he confronts Brock. Although Brock has the right to stay at the rental house because he's paying rent, he doesn't have the right to act the way he has with Susie in Paul's absence. As their argument escalates into a fight, police officers arrive at the scene, having been called by Paul. This was Paul's plan all along, to get Brock out of the house so that Susie would be left alone. Eventually, both Paul and Brock are taken to the police station. After everything is settled, Officer Kim questions Paul about why he came to the police station, but he avoids answering and quickly leaves, saying, "I'll return all of Brock's money." A while later, Brock returns to meet Susie, but she isn't home. He searches the house and stumbles upon the recorder with Susie's voice recorded on it. Brock listens to the entire recording and, terrified by what he hears, runs out of the house in fear. Now aware of everything, Brock is extremely shaken. While running away, he spots Susie sitting inside a parked car. Knowing that Brock could cause trouble for her, Susie decides to eliminate him. At the same time, Paul is on his way home. While driving, he calls Susie and, after some thought, tells her that he is ready to sell the rental house to her. Susie is overjoyed, unable to contain her excitement as her efforts seem to have finally paid off. The story then flashes back to the past, where Kim is explaining to a reporter how she solved the water tank case. The reporter praises her and asks how she manages to catch killers. Kim replies, "I suspect everyone, whether they are my superiors, my relatives, or even reporters like you. That's why they call me the Hunter." In the present, Kim arrives at Paul's house. After a brief conversation with Paul, she grows suspicious that something is wrong. When Kim steps outside, she sees Susie smoking a cigarette nearby. And with that, the episode ends.